Look, we all know these preseason exhibition games don't really matter at all. But that's not going to stop us from sharing our biggest overreactions.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shea. This is our other host, Andy Patton, and we're so thrilled to be joining you at your place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch. And we want to remind you, you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Big shout out to the everydayers joining us and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. Welcome into every one of you. Let's get after it. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Andy, we've been counting down every Monday, but it's literally 1 week from today. We get the opening day of college basketball. Pins and needles waiting on this thing. Andy, today on the show, we are going to just forecasting ahead. We had the completely unexpected and unfortunate passing of USF coach Amir Abdur-Rahim late last week. We will pay our respects to him and look into that situation. And then before we get there, though, we want to celebrate that we're getting all these exhibition games, charity exhibition games, between high major opponents. It's a blast. It's incredible. Thank you, NCAA, for doing something right and letting us get that. Anyway, there was a bunch of them over the weekend, Andy. So basically what we've done is put them all in a pot and stir them up. It is Halloween week after all. And we're pulling out 3 positive takeaways we had. And then we're going to switch and we'll do 3 takeaways that we had. And so that's where we're headed. So we're not going to talk about every game. We're not going to go through the games. We're going to talk about things that we think are maybe legitimate takeaways that can be learned from these, even though the vast majority of what we do, as we joked about in the cold open, is overreact to these exhibitions. It is important to try to find, Andy, how we can read between the lines and figure out what does matter. So, Andy, let's get right into the good of that. What is something that stood out to us over the weekend that we think does matter?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's so many incredible matchups. I think you're absolutely right that is one of the most fun aspects of what we've seen. You got Kansas and Arkansas, Creighton and Purdue, Gonzaga and USC. As we're recording this right now, finishing up Houston and Texas A&M. There is just so many fantastic of these charity exhibitions or exhibitions, secret scrimmages that aren't so secret, whatever they call them in those different categories. But I think the top takeaway that I had in terms of something that seems really legitimate and could be a big catalyst for maybe a difference in college basketball than what we were expecting is how great these young players looked at Arkansas. And it's not like we're surprised that John Calipari has good young players. That is what he has done for the entirety of his college basketball career. But 2 in particular were guys who weren't bad last year at Kentucky, but certainly weren't as good as they looked in this scrimmage game over Kansas. Arkansas won this one, by the way, 85-69. Yes, Kansas did not have Hunter Dickinson. They did not have Rylan Griffin. They did not have Shaquille Moore. But what we saw from DJ Wagner and Zvonimir Ivisic in particular was incredible. Wagner's 24 points on 8 of 12 shooting, knocked in a pair of threes, had 4 rebounds as well. Ivisic, 18 points, 6 boards, 4 assists and a block. 5 of 10 from the field. So not the most efficient night, but he was 2 of 5 from 3. And those 2 guys this is not what they look like at Kentucky. Obviously, Big Z had the eligibility issues and didn't get into the season until partway through and had showed some flashes of being very good. But by that point, Kentucky's season was already kind of in a unique spot. But Wagner this is not the kind of performance we saw from him last year. And he was so electric and dynamic and fantastic out of high school. And if he gets back to being that kind of player in this system, I know it's the same system, but maybe the pressure of being a true freshman and having those elite guards behind him and Shepard and Dillingham, maybe he can kind of step out and be, more of that player that we thought we saw from him. Now, he's got some pretty talented freshmen on his heels again, in this case with Boogie Fland, who had 22.6 steals and 5 assists as well. Just a really dynamic performance from Arkansas in general, and in particular that trio of young stars.
Yeah, man, it was a lot of fun. I think again, one-off, small sample size, but this version of DJ Wagner could be the young man that we thought we would see last year, who just didn't do it. Shot under 30% from 3, 2 of 4, as you mentioned in this one, and so was very encouraged by that. And I'd really love to see it come together. I think, yes, for Big Z getting a full, true offseason with the certainty of knowing that he was going to be able to play is a big deal. But man, I was impressed by Boogie Fland, his athleticism, his attacking the rim, and everything that came along with that. And Andy, just on the flip side quickly, let's not take too much away from Kansas. As you said, they're missing all those dudes. DeJuan Harris had to step up and be the number one scoring option, which he's usually a facilitator. And so we'll wait to see what we're going to get from those guys when Kansas has their full complement of players back. Andy, shall we switch now to number 2, where Creighton beat Purdue 93-87. Let's remember this time last year, Purdue went down to Arkansas and Arkansas won that. So it just tells you how much you should truly take away from these. But the Blue Jays do beat the Boilermakers 93-87. And Andy, the takeaway here for us is Pop Isaac steps in for Creighton and is immediately their go-to scorer. I think we often wonder about, like, hey, is that or should that be Ryan Kalkbrenner? And I think there will certainly be days when it will be and should be. He is their leading scorer. But on this day, it was Pop Isaacs who took that mantle.
Yeah, and was incredibly efficient. 24 points on 10 of 14 shooting. He took 6 3-pointers, knocked down 4 of them. This is a guy who was very, very good at Texas Tech last year. He goes into a system at Creighton where he's going to get a lot of looks. I mean, we've seen transfers thrive in Greg McDermott's system. I mean, look no further than Stephen Ashworth, his backcourt running mate, who was very good last year after coming over from Utah State. Obviously, Baylor Shireman had a tremendous career at Creighton after being very productive at South Dakota State prior to that. And so for Isaacs to step in and immediately look like, hey, we're not going to miss a beat here. I mean, nobody can fully replace Trey Alexander or Baylor Shireman. Those guys were fantastic and incredibly talented and versatile players. But Pop Isaacs looks like he's going to be right in there with Ashworth. Those two guys can really light it up from beyond the arc. They're both just very, very talented scoring options, and it opens up the middle for Kalkbrenner even more. And I think there's a couple of takeaways here. I mean, Isaacs was good and very efficient. Stephen Ashworth was also 4 of 6 from 3, had 16 in this one. Kalk had 18 on 6 of 7 shooting, and it's like, okay, Purdue was just letting guys get whatever they wanted, and I think that we didn't get into that too much on the negative side, but Purdue gave up 93 points here and gave up some really efficient scoring. And on one hand, yeah, Creighton's a really good offense, and they're probably going to do this to a lot of teams. But on the other hand, you don't have Zach Edey anymore, and he was such an impactful defensive player, and you can feel it with how this game went for the Boilermakers. This is not a dramatic. I mean, even in the regular season, if Purdue loses to 6 to Creighton, it's not a concerning loss necessarily. But I am curious if Purdue's defense is going to be something that we have more conversations about going forward this season.
Quickly, Andy, our third wow of these, because these goods are all like kind of surprises, things that maybe we weren't quite sure about or whatever, is the reality of Seth Trimble at North Carolina. Seth Trimble immediately entered the transfer portal, ultimately decided to come back. As Trilly Donovan says, sometimes the best players are the ones you get back. Mm-hmm. And so Seth Trimble has been Carolina's leading scorer in their blue-white scrimmage. He had 19. And their leading scorer in their charity exhibition at Memphis, he had 33. But in both of those instances, it was sans RJ Davis. He and Davis were on different teams in the scrimmage, and then RJ Davis didn't play in the Memphis game because of a hard fall he took in that scrimmage. So the question coming into Carolina's exhibition game on Sunday, albeit against a much lesser opponent than these other games we're talking about, is will Seth Trimble continue that with RJ Davis back in the lineup, or was that just a stopgap filler without Davis? And they matched each other with 15 points on Sunday afternoon. Now it's Vanderbilt transfer Van Allen Lubin that had 18 points, and freshman Ian Jackson, who was electric on Sunday with 21 to lead all scorers. But I think we saw, Andy, that even with RJ Davis back in the lineup, Seth Trimble is going to hold his own, and they might be a dynamic duo along with Elliot Cadeau as a true starting 3-guard lineup for Hubert Davis, which is something we usually don't see at Carolina, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm most intrigued by here is what this lineup's going to look like. You start the 3 guards, you start Cade Tyson at the 4. Now we've seen we've seen Hubert Davis go with kind of a small ball 4. I mean, Harrison Ingram was that, but Ingram was I think more of a traditional 4 than maybe Cade Tyson is. And so you have Tyson at the 4, you have the 3 guards along with him, and Jalen Washington at the 5. I'm just intrigued how that lineup, how much they're going to utilize that lineup. Is that the starting lineup? Do you have both of the freshmen coming off the bench? And Van Allen Lubin, I mean, he had a really good performance here, and he's a guy that we weren't really sure how much of an impact he was going to have for Carolina. And again, the competition level here was not great, but that's still a promising sign for them. So I am curious in the post-Bacot era how much Carolina maybe switches gears a little bit and goes a little faster, a little lighter, as opposed to being a bit more focused on the half-court offense. And I think that's one of the more intriguing things I'm looking forward to this season, and particularly with Carolina. And we got a little glimpse of what that might look like here. Isaac, want to move on to some of the maybe not as positive takeaways that we have, some things that we saw that were like, oh, maybe a bit of a concern there. And really all offseason, there was concern about Indiana's 3-point shooting, and there was concern about Illinois' defense. And folks, guess what? Those two things, we're still concerned about them. And we're going to tell you why coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Folks, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place those bets. Let's talk natty odds for those teams that we were just talking about. North Carolina leads the group there, plus 2,500 to take home the national championship. Arkansas is next at plus 3,200, and Creighton not too far behind them at plus 4,000. If you like those odds, if there's any other teams, they got Wooden Award, they got conference odds, all of that stuff. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Like we said, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Isaac, moving on to talk about some of the things we saw in these scrimmage games that maybe are a little bit more concerning, again, with the caveat that these are exhibition games. And a lot of times they were, in some of these games, they weren't fouling players out. In some of these games, we saw lineups that we're probably not going to see much in the regular season. So blah, 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 the typical caveats you have with preseason exhibition type games. But we had a scrimmage game between Indiana and Tennessee. It was a 66-62 win by the Hoosiers. Mike Woodson's team picks up what looks like a quality performance for them. But both these teams, I mean, they could have built full-on neighborhoods with the amount of bricks that we saw between these two teams. The Hoosiers shoot 4 of 19 from 3, just over 20% from beyond the arc. The Vols, meanwhile, 8 of 35, just kept hacking up threes, even though they weren't going down. 23% was the highest percent either team shot from distance. That is a rough shooting game. And we didn't talk about it as much with Tennessee, although we knew the loss of Dalton Connect was going to impact their scoring. But it was a big conversation on this show and many other places kind of coming into the year that Indiana, they had some great transfer portal additions and there's some excitement in Bloomington, but this was not a team that looked on paper like they were going to shoot the rock all that well. And one scrimmage against a good defensive team doesn't tell you the whole story, but it certainly kind of fits into that narrative pretty nicely.
Yeah, it really does, Andy, and I don't think it does anything to settle the minds and stomachs of Hoosiers fans who were already concerned about this and worried about it. And unfortunately, this is just fulfilling that prophecy for us. Now, again, it doesn't count. It's not in anybody's scorebook or record book or anything like that, but it is against another D1 opponent who they will be facing, albeit a opponent who's a very good defensive team year after year after year. So we take that into account as well. But still, it's got to be better. And in this day and age, to see both of these teams shoot a combined under 30% is at the least eye-opening.
Yeah. I mean, under 25%.
Yeah.
It was ugly.
Too much leeway, too much margin.
Yeah. When Chaz Lanier shot 2 of 12 for Tennessee, Ziegler was 2 of 10. Like, And then Carlisle for Indiana was 1 of 6. Like there was just some ugly, ugly shooting. Again, sometimes teams have bad nights. It happens. But considering that both these teams, that was a concern coming in, like you said, it doesn't exactly alleviate those concerns. And speaking of teams that had concerns coming in, Gonzaga's defense was something that a lot of folks were concerned about coming into the season. Ken Pom had them second in offensive efficiency and 45th in adjusted defensive efficiency in the preseason. Obviously, you take those numbers with a grain of salt before games have been played, but then Gonzaga goes out and gives up 96 points to USC. They shot 55.5% from the field. The Trojans did. They were 11 of 16 at the rim. Gonzaga, Chet Holmgren's not walking through the door, folks. They do not have the kind of rim protection that they need to mitigate the fact that they have a small backcourt. Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman are both under 6'3". Nembhard is listed at 6 foot. I've seen him eye to eye. I'm not sure he's 6 foot. Let's put it that way. And so to have smaller guards, sometimes you're going to get bullied. And USC has a huge starting lineup. Desmond Clauser, starting point guard, he's 6'6". They started Chibuzo Agbo from Boise State at the 2. He's 6'7". St. Thomas started. He's also 6'7". Like that's a huge team, man, and a bit of a challenge for a backcourt like Gonzaga's. But they scored 93 points in this game and lost. And I think we're going to see Gonzaga look a little bit like last year's Alabama team, where they're going to outscore a lot of teams, but they're also going to maybe not blow away some teams just because their defense is maybe not as good as they're going to need it to be. And we'll see if Mark Few is able to make some adjustments and get this team in a better spot. But the first test did not look great on that end of the floor.
And that last statement you made, Andy, is the wrinkle and the angle I'm looking at. Is it's not there right now. What does it look like January, February, March? That's the key that we're looking for with Gonzaga's defense. Sticking on that side of the ball, Andy, if you will allow me that. And in the same conference, oddly enough, as USC are the Illinois Fighting Illini. Yes, who are both in the Big Ten now. We were concerned about Illinois' defense, or I guess really I should say Brad Underwood is concerned about Illinois' defense. And to be fair, his concerns are valid and correct. His squad goes down to Oxford. This game was in Oxford, but Ole Miss wins 91-74. 51 points scored in the first half by Chris Beard's team. They shot 48.6% from the field and an even better 52.2% from 3. So, Andy, the problem is not only is Illinois' defense bad, but they, unlike Gonzaga, who you just talked about, did not score 93 points. They only brought 74 points to match that, and that's not going to do it. Ole Miss was up by 11 points, like 4.5 minutes into this game. Illinois was plagued by turnovers, 22 of them. All of that adds up to, we already knew your defense is going to be bad, and it is, but you got to figure it out in other places if you're going to win basketball games.
Yeah, Illinois. Underwood said that there was like a 7th grade team in the state of Illinois that he thought could score a bunch of points on them. He was being facetious, I assume. But this is not a great look for this team up to this point. We'll see if again, they're similar to Gonzaga in a lot of ways. An offensive team that you're expecting to be one of the better offensive teams in the country, a defensive team that's probably not going to be very good. But again, if they're going to be scoring 74 points against decent teams like Ole Miss, that's going to be a problem for this team going forward. So we'll see again what adjustments are made between now and the start of the season, and then now, and of course, when they get into conference play and get closer and closer to March.
That start of the season, as a reminder, is just 8 days away, my friends. And also keep your eyes on USC and Ole Miss, because these are teams that we're all wondering about. And I know Ole Miss, for example, is really old, really experienced. Yeah. Chris Beard is for all of whatever you want to say about him, he's a great basketball coach. So I'm really intrigued to see what these Rebs can do. Andy, let's turn a little more somber here. We were all unfortunately shocked to hear of the passing of USF coach Amir Abdur-Rahim late on, I guess that was Thursday afternoon. Yeah. So we want to remember him, share some thoughts, and talk about what this means for the Bulls as they move forward. We'll do all that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time, we are just 1 week away from the start of college basketball season. I guess I just said 8 games or 8 days, Andy, a second ago. I was wrong. 7. And there's absolutely nothing better, though, regardless of my math inability. There's nothing better than the atmosphere of a college basketball game, the anticipation of what's going to happen, the liveliness of the crowd, all of it coming to life. You never know what's going to go down, and you want to make sure that you're there. Well, thankfully, there's a ticketing app called Game Time that helps you get great tickets at a great price. And not even just for sports, by the way. Game Time has tickets for all events. And when you're getting tickets for events this year, they've got a new feature at Game Time called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through everything else. So whether it's Game Time ticket coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has got you covered. Maybe you're wanting to get some great early season college basketball hoops in the Houston area. Andy talked about earlier, Houston and A&M are playing down in that area as we record. Well, Game Time has tickets at the Toyota Center for Rice versus Florida State and that Houston-Auburn game starting at $31 apiece with a super deal in the lower bowl and on the sideline for $68 apiece. Man, great stuff. So go take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Andy, Thursday afternoon, you and I started exchanging some texts due to some breaking news out of nowhere that took us both aback. And that news was that Amir Abdur-Rahim, the head coach at USF, this was going to be his second year after having taken Kennesaw State to the NCAA tournament a couple seasons ago, had shockingly passed away at the young age of 43. Andy, it was just crazy news to hear this. Neither of us knew that there were any sort of health conditions or anything going on. As you had said, like, hey, I probably wouldn't be surprised if they were just kind of trying to keep that close to the vest. But the other thing is that from the press release from USF said that coach passed away from, quote, complications from surgery at the Tampa area hospital, end quote. So he was undergoing some sort of medical procedure. We don't know what that is. I've tried to look around and find it, Andy. I can't find it anywhere. No. And understandably so. It's probably like a HIPAA thing that they can't release. And the family and the school hasn't said, so that makes sense. And then just, I mean, this is the way life goes, Andy. It's the tenuous nature of it that sometimes, despite, you know, all the medical advances we have, sometimes things just don't go well. And unfortunately, that happened in the case of Amir Abdur-Rahim on Thursday, and he passes away.
Yeah, just, I mean, shocking news. 43 is so young. I mean, one of the first things that crossed my mind when I saw this was how young he was. I didn't know that he was only 43 years old. And I think, you know, my first thought was how much success he'd had, you know, getting a coach, you know, getting a job in the American Athletic Conference and then having the success that South Florida had last year. And to be 43 and be on that trajectory, I mean, there's so much conversation about other young coaches in the game who are succeeding, like Pat Kelsey, who I think is 48, and others who are under 50. And it's like, Abdur-Rahim's 43. I mean, that's so young, not only to have had the success that he had in his career, but of course, to pass away. And I mean, it was really tragic to see this. And this, the career is a part of this conversation. And obviously the South Florida direction is a part of the conversation, but it's not the important part of the conversation. And I think that's, you know, what we want to highlight here is if he had passed away after his first season at Kennesaw State when they went 1-28, like it wouldn't, you know, it doesn't change the conversation. It is part of, you know, it's just a tragedy because he was a beloved figure. He was a beloved husband, a father. The players that he coached have come out in waves talking about how impactful he was on their careers. And you know, I follow many players, mostly Gonzaga players on social media, and some of them were transfers who played with Abdur-Rahim either when he was an assistant coach at other places or even as a head coach. And just the photos that they're sharing of him, you know, embracing them after losses. And some of them have shared photos of text conversations that they had with him. And you could really feel the love that he had for his job and his career and the love that these players had for him. And it's just, I mean, it's tragic. It's of course tragic for anybody at this young age to go so suddenly. We saw the report that he'd missed a few practices before it had been announced. And so I think there had been some reason that he went into surgery, and maybe, I don't know if it was an emergency, if it was planned. Again, we don't know any of those details, and they're not for us to know at this time. And maybe they'll come down the line, maybe they never will, and that's okay. But it's I mean, just what a devastating loss for the sport, for the South Florida community, for the fans, for the players who are currently, on that South Florida team, and players who've played for him in the past. Just a really shocking and sudden loss for the sport, and just for the greater basketball community.
Yeah, Andy, that's all well said, because in moments like this, I think for us as sports media people, it's easy to think, oh, shoot, what does this mean for South Florida? What does this mean for blah, blah, blah? And it's like, dude, who cares, man? This is a human life, and this is a man that leaves behind a wife and 3 kids, Layla and Lana and Aiden. Like, it's like, I want to say their names, right? Like, to remember the importance of family and people, and all the more so because of this man that he is, that you spoke of, that, like, it's just, it leaves such a massive hole because of how well revered he was as a human being. There's so many of these guys that, maybe somebody passes away and it's a coach, and it's like, oh man, I remember when he really stuck it to me at practice, that, and it's like, but and while he clearly, Coach Abdur-Rahim was a great and phenomenal coach, it's so telling to me that everything coming out is about the man that he is, the man that he was on and off the court. And that to me is a sign of a life well lived, and a reminder to us, and a call to each of us of how we ought to live our lives, that we leave an indelible mark on the people we encounter.
Well said. And yeah, the age thing is just so heartbreaking. I mean, we've seen coaches in the last year or so, that some that we've talked about on the show, who passed away in their mid 80s or late 80s or whatever. And it's not that that's not sad. Of course it is. But, at this point, like, there was so much untold future. There was so much more that could have happened here. I mean, and again, you focus on the basketball side of things and be like, what would have happened to South Florida if, would he have gotten a high major? Of course, all those conversations could have happened, and who knows what would have happened there. But it's more than that. It's just, I mean, again, his kids now grow up without a father anymore. And that's just, it's heartbreaking, and it's sad to that we're having to have this conversation and that we're discussing it. But again, like you said, that it's a reminder to live the best life you can before it gets to that point, because you don't know when that's going to be. And so for him, it certainly seems like that is something that he did. And I mean, hats off to him to have put together the best life that he could. And it's unfortunate that he didn't get to see it out as long as he should have. But I think he was a tremendous force in this sport at such a young age. And there is some power in having had that kind of impact on this game, before he even turned 45. That's an incredible accomplishment for him. It's just tragic that he didn't get to see it out more than that.
And Andy, because we need to, unless it's come out like while we were recording, to my knowledge, we do not yet know who USF's interim coach will be.
Yeah.
We're still waiting to hear from that. Their season opener is in Jacksonville, actually, against Florida, number 21. And so I'm sure there will be all sorts of tributes and dedications to Coach in that moment. So we wait for that.
It's a sad, somber way to end the show, but that is going to wrap it up for us today. We got some more fun stuff coming your way later this week. We got some more team previews we're going to do. We'll keep you up to date on any other exhibitions. I know that we got Alabama and Memphis facing off on Monday evening, so that should be a fun one there as well. And then, we're just a few days away, a week away from the first games of the season. We got bold predictions coming at the end of this week, and then next week at this time, we'll be previewing real, actual games that count in the standings. We got Ohio State and Texas on the first day of the season. We got Gonzaga and Baylor in the evening after Monday Night Football, an incredible slate of games to start the season. We're very excited to have some good basketball games on day one. I cannot wait to be talking about that next week, Isaac. But that, again, is going to do it for us today. So, folks, as always, want to say apologies to the lawyer family, which we did not mention him when we talked about Purdue today. So I guess that's a real apology there. Let's go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace.